Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to a brand new episode of At the Buzzer Sports, where we talk all things basketball all the time. I'm your host, John Drummond, and today we're trying to do something a little different. And something I was thinking about the other day is one of the biggest what-ifs in NBA history that nobody really talks about, and that's when Tim Duncan almost signed with the Orlando Magic. And it's something that I like to think about because the San Antonio Spurs since 2000 are one of the most decorated franchises in the NBA. I mean, 4 championships since 2000. They have the most wins with over 1,200, even though their last 3 to 5 seasons have been spent being under 500. You know, they drafted guys like Tony Parker, Manu Ginobili, Tim Duncan, Kawhi Leonard. They just got lucky and drafted Victor Wembanyama, who looks like he's going to be one of the greatest players of all time. But that household name of the San Antonio Spurs of being able to draft so well, being able to win at a high level consistently, you know, just bringing in a bunch of Hall of Fame talent may not have been the same if they did not draft Tim Duncan or if they let go of Tim Duncan back in 2000. So the season before, the Orlando Magic made their pitch to go get a guy like Tim Duncan. They went 41-41 with their 2 leading scorers being Darrell Armstrong and Ron Mercer. And that season, the Orlando Magic were not just making a pitch to Tim Duncan, but they were making a pitch to Tracy McGrady and Grant Hill as well. And it doesn't make it better that 1 year removed from an NBA championship, the San Antonio Spurs lost in the first round to the Phoenix Suns. And the future was really bleak for the San Antonio Spurs team because they had guys like David Robinson and Avery Johnson, who were 34 years old, and Mario Elie and Terry Porter being 36. So obviously 3 or 4 seasons into his career, Tim Duncan rookie deal was over, and he was looking out for some options to go and contend. Because Tim Duncan doesn't know that Tony Parker, Manu Ginobili, and Kawhi Leonard are about to come to the San Antonio Spurs in years to come. He does not know that he's going to win 4 more championships with the San Antonio Spurs team. Yes, they had a great defense. Yes, Tim Duncan was a great player, but the future was not certain for this team. In that season, Tim Duncan averaged about 23 points per game, 12 rebounds, and also 2 blocks to add on top of that. He was top 5 in MVP voting. He made the All-NBA first team, I believe, and he also made the All-Defensive first team. In that season, Tim Duncan went on to average about 23 points per game, 12 rebounds, and 2 blocks. He was top 5 in MVP voting, All-NBA first team, and All-Defensive first team. And what makes it even more interesting for me is Tim Duncan injured his meniscus towards the mid to later part of that season when they lost in the first round to the Phoenix Suns. I mean, you were still getting 23 and 12 from David Robinson. So what confuses me is why not just go out and try again with a fully healthy team instead of trying to go sign with the Orlando Magic. But instead of just instantly running it back with the San Antonio Spurs and guaranteeing his spot for the future on that team, he went to go talk to guys like the Orlando Magic and Doc Rivers. And Doc Rivers made a pitch to Tracy McGrady and Tim Duncan, being Orlando was closer to where they live. And if we look at some of the talent on this team, Tracy McGrady was with the Toronto Raptors next to Vince Carter, where he was averaging about 15 points per game and shooting 27% from 3, eventually having a very disappointing season with the Toronto Raptors. Doc Rivers and the Orlando Magic saw an opportunity to get a young star like Tracy McGrady on this team so he can really progress and become the superstar nobody thought he was. And Grant Hill also had a very disappointing season with the Detroit Pistons after he averaged 26 points per game. And Grant Hill was somebody that was signed pretty quickly when the Orlando Magic pitched their case. And when the Orlando Magic brought in Grant Hill and it looked like they were about to bring in Tracy McGrady, bringing in Tim Duncan was the last piece to where this team could really be contenders in the East. One thing Tim Duncan brought to this team was a defensive presence, a championship pedigree type of player, and that's something that he has already accomplished. He was already an NBA champion. He was already being top 5, top 3 in MVP voting. And the Orlando Magic wanted to bring that in because they weren't having championship success. Even with Shaq in their earlier years, they could not find that championship success and they could not get over the hump. And bringing in a guy like Tim Duncan could have changed all of that. And Tim Duncan was basically this close to saying that he was going to the Orlando Magic. He was going to go meet with Greg Popovich in person to tell him the news that he's going to sign with Orlando. But Doc Rivers botched it. He botched it. One thing that was very important for Tim Duncan was he was going to invite his family onto the planes so they can travel with him during the games and 2 NBA games. And one thing Doc Rivers did not let Tim Duncan do, or was going to say that Tim Duncan could not do, was bring his family onto the team jet. And later on, Doc Rivers released a statement saying that they had enough money to sign Grant Hill and Tracy McGrady. They did not have enough money to sign Tim Duncan. But I'm pretty sure they would have rather had Tim Duncan over Tracy McGrady and Grant Hill. I'm sure they make that decision where, okay, if Tim Duncan wants to come here, we can't have Grant Hill and Tracy McGrady. And the San Antonio Spurs, they knew they were about to lose their franchise cornerstone. They knew how important Tim Duncan was to this organization, so they went out and aggressively tried to bring Tim Duncan back. And then they realized that may not be the way to go. They were about to send everything at Tim Duncan, just waterboard him with how much they desperately wanted Tim Duncan to come back to San Antonio. And with a 6-year, $67 million deal on the table from the Orlando Magic, the San Antonio Spurs had to think of something fast. And Grant Hill was somebody who only played about 47 games throughout that entire tenure he had with the Orlando Magic, just constantly getting injured. And if we look back, and it's the Tim Duncan and Tracy McGrady led Orlando Magic, how many times do they go to the NBA Finals? How many times do they play Kobe and Shaq in the NBA Finals when we know they three-peated in the very near future? So you're telling me we would have got at least one final, maybe even multiple, of Tracy McGrady versus Kobe Bryant and Tim Duncan versus Shaquille O'Neal. And there's a lot of people who would have said, these are the two best duos in the NBA, and they're clashing at each other every single year in the NBA Finals. It probably would have been like the Cavs versus Warriors, where we get 4 seasons straight of the same teams going to the NBA Finals and duking it out. Because if we look at Tim Duncan's stats the very next years or the very next few years in the regular season, he was second in MVP when he averaged 22 points per game, 12 rebounds, and about 2.3 blocks. The year after that, he won MVP back in 2002, 25 points per game, 13 rebounds, 2.5 blocks. He won MVP again, averaging 23 points, 13 rebounds, and 3 blocks per game. This is a guy who was considered a top 5 player in the league, if not top 3. And then you pair that in a superstar talent of Tracy McGrady, who in the next 3 years averaged 27 points per game in 2001. He also averaged 26 points per game in 2002, and he averaged 32 points per game in 2003. This is a guy who was one of the best scorers in the NBA and won a scoring title in back-to-back seasons in 2003 and in 2004. But as we all know, Tim Duncan inevitably decided to go back to the San Antonio Spurs, and he won 4 more rings. And now the San Antonio Spurs are looked at as one of these pristine organizations that always draft fantastic talent. They're always winning at a high level. They're always bringing in guys who may not be thought of highly throughout the draft process, and they always seem to work out. So you guys, let me know what you think. Do you think Tim Duncan would have the same amount of NBA championships if he went to the Orlando Magic? And just to think about it, I know a lot of people are talking about Tracy McGrady's injury bug. Throughout those next 3 to 4 seasons, Tracy McGrady always played about 55 games plus. So he was presumably healthy. Does Tim Duncan make the Orlando Magic one of the most pristine franchises in the NBA? Is Tracy McGrady ranked higher in your all-time list if he were to win a championship or multiple with Tim Duncan in the Orlando Magic? Do we look at Doc Rivers differently as a head coach if he was to get over the hump a lot earlier and a lot more often with the Orlando Magic? And this is always the fun part about what ifs, because it's such a domino effect. You know, if Tim Duncan leaves, Greg Popovich may not be the coach for the San Antonio Spurs much longer, because I don't think they would have had as much success. And the San Antonio Spurs, in my opinion, would have stuck with that label that they had before drafting Tim Duncan, which was inconsistent. And the San Antonio Spurs will be looked at as a franchise that fumbled the bag and let go of the greatest power forward in NBA history in Tim Duncan. So anyway, that's just my take on it. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section. Would Tim Duncan still be as decorated as an NBA player if he were to go to the Orlando Magic? Would the Orlando Magic be as decorated as the San Antonio Spurs if he went to the Orlando Magic? Do you look at Doc Rivers differently? Do you look at Tracy McGrady differently? Do you look at Greg Popovich differently? Let me know in the comments. And if you guys like this type of content, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. And I'm out. Peace.